Society tells you a very specific lie. It tells you that if you notice too much, then something must be wrong with you. Too observant, too analytical, too suspicious, too intense, too aware. But psychology reveals something much deeper. For some people, noticing everything is not a flaw, it is a survival skill. It is the result of a mind that learned to scan, to predict, to decode, and to protect itself before anyone else even realized there was a problem. If you are the kind of person who instantly picks up on a shifted tone, a fake smile, a strange silence, or a tiny change in someone's energy, stay until the end, because what looks like overthinking may actually be one of the most powerful psychological traits a person can have. Most people walk into a room and see people. You walk into a room and see patterns. You notice who is performing, who is uncomfortable, who is secretly angry, who is pretending to be relaxed, who just changed their tone a little too quickly, who looked at who before answering, who smiled but did not really smile. And while everyone else is busy participating, you are quietly collecting data. That is where your power begins. Because noticing everything is not the same as being paranoid. It is not the same as being dramatic. It is not the same as being too sensitive. It means your brain is constantly reading beneath the surface. You do not just hear words. You hear hesitation. You hear tension. You hear what people are trying not to say. And often, the scariest part is that you are right. Very often. That is why people who notice everything can be incredibly difficult to manipulate. Manipulation depends on blind spots. It depends on distraction. It depends on you missing the small clues that reveal the bigger truth. But you do not miss them. You catch the pause, the contradiction, the too perfect explanation. The body language that does not match the story. The energy that feels slightly off even when everything looks normal on the surface. And once your mind catches a pattern, it does not let it go easily. That is where your gift becomes dark, because most people think seeing everything is a blessing only. It is not. It can also be exhausting. When your mind is always scanning, it is very hard to fully relax. You sit in a conversation, but part of your brain is watching the room. You listen to one person, but half of you is already reading the other three. You are trying to enjoy the moment, but your awareness keeps running in the background like an engine that refuses to shut off. That constant scanning can make ordinary life feel louder than it should. A crowded room can leave you drained. A casual conversation can feel like a puzzle. A simple text message can become a whole investigation. And people who do not live this way often misunderstand you completely. They assume you are reading too deeply. They tell you to relax, to stop overthinking, to stop making everything so complicated. But what they call overthinking is often just pattern recognition that never learned how to turn itself off. You are not inventing everything. You are connecting the pieces other people ignore. That is a very different thing. And yet, the more accurately you see people, the more isolated you can become. Because once you see the mask, it becomes harder to enjoy the performance. Once you notice the manipulation, it becomes harder to pretend you did not. Once you see the insecurity hiding behind the arrogance, the fear hiding behind the humor, the envy hiding behind the compliment, you cannot unsee it. That is the burden of awareness. You do not just notice beauty. You notice friction. You notice dishonesty. You notice what people are afraid to admit, even to themselves. And sometimes that makes you the most accurate person in the room, and the loneliest one, because people do not always love being seen that clearly. In fact, many people are more comfortable being misunderstood than being fully understood. Misunderstanding gives them room to hide, but you remove that comfort without even trying. You look at someone and quietly know they are not as confident as they claim. You hear them talk and realize they are overcompensating. You watch their behavior and understand the story they are not saying out loud. To you, that is normal. To them, it can feel threatening, because people often do not fear judgment as much as they fear exposure. And an observant person is a mirror they cannot easily lie to. That is why some people feel strangely uncomfortable around quiet, observant minds, not because those minds are loud, but because they are accurate. And accuracy is dangerous to people who are built on performance. There is also another layer to this trait. People who notice everything often become impossible to fool, but very easy to misunderstand. That is the paradox. You can see the full picture and still be called negative. You can spot the red flags and still be told you are too suspicious. You can predict the problem before it happens and still be accused of overreacting. So over time, you learn a very strange lesson. Sometimes it is safer to stay quiet than to explain what you see, because once you start pointing things out, people stop hearing the observation and start defending their ego. They think you are attacking them. They think you are being difficult. They think you are creating problems instead of identifying them. So you begin to hold your cards closer. You stop explaining every conclusion. You stop offering your insight to people who only want comfort, not truth. And that is where your silence becomes strategic, not because you do not care, because you care too much to waste your energy on people who are committed to staying blind. That is the darker side of noticing everything. You start becoming selective. You start asking yourself who deserves your attention, who deserves your energy, who deserves the version of you that can read the room in seconds, and who only deserves the surface version, because you already know what most people do not. The wrong people will not respect your insight. They will resent it. The right people will recognize it. They will feel safer around it. They will know that your awareness is not a threat. It is protection. But even protection has a cost. A mind that sees too much can struggle to trust simplicity. You may replay conversations after they end. You may catch yourself noticing the one sentence that did not fit. You may remember what someone said 3 months ago and compare it to what they are saying now. You may sense an emotional shift before the other person has even admitted it to themselves. And because your mind is good at spotting hidden patterns, it can also become good at expecting the worst. That is the trap. The gift and the wound are often the same thing. You see what others miss, but you also carry what others never had to notice. So the goal is not to stop noticing. The goal is to learn how to carry your awareness without letting it become a prison. You do not need to silence your perception. You need to trust it without letting it consume you. You need to understand that seeing everything does not mean you are responsible for everything. It does not mean every pattern has to be solved. It does not mean every red flag must be chased. It does not mean every strange feeling has to become a war. Sometimes your awareness is simply information. Sometimes it is a warning. Sometimes it is a boundary. And sometimes it is the reason you can walk away before your life gets tangled in the wrong people. That is not weakness. That is intelligence with teeth. So if this feels familiar, do not let anyone convince you that you are broken for seeing too much. You may be the one person in the room who can actually tell what is real. And in a world full of performance, that is a rare kind of power. If this resonated with you, it probably means you have spent years noticing what everyone else ignored. But why is it that people who see everything often feel like they never fully belong anywhere? Click the next video on your screen right now to discover the hidden reason you feel different, and why the same awareness that isolates you may also be the thing that makes you exceptional. I'll see you there.